All right, let's get started for today. First Friday of the year. Okay. So some quick reminders about what you should be making sure you've done by Monday. So you should complete that introductory readiness survey. I see almost everybody's gotten it done. That was posted in that first announcement. Those of you who haven't completed, please go in and do that, in part because I think one of the questions on there has to do with technology. So on Monday, we're going to be doing that review test on materials that you should have learned in your prerequisites. So if you have any computer issues, if you don't have a computer to bring to class, we are going to be doing those computerized. So let me know either in that survey or send me an email so that I can make sure to bring us some loaner devices down on Monday. Okay. So to go with that, since we'll be using the Respondus lockdown browser for our normal exams, we're going to practice using it on Monday for that prerequisite test. So make sure to download that before next week. If you have trouble with it, I'm not a tech expert, but I do like troubleshooting. So if it's an easy problem, you can send me a screenshot and I'll try to work through that with you. But I'd rather not be troubleshooting 70 people all in this room on Monday. So make sure to get that done. Okay. You'll have your first weekly lecture quiz to complete over the weekend. It'll just be 3 questions on the stuff that we're talking about today. Reminder, you have 2 attempts for that. So go through, try it on your own. If you got a bunch of stuff wrong, go back, re-study, take it again. So hopefully that'll help you prepare for eventually our exam on this material, but hopefully not too stressfully so. Final reminder is that your labs start next week. We talked about the structure of lab on Wednesday, but reminder, you're doing alternating anatomy and physiology labs. So you're just registered for one CRN, but you're going to be flipping across the hallway every week. And I made you that table to make sure that you can tell, okay, what is this number? How does it go with the letter? How does it go with our room number and actual course time? Okay. So hopefully that's all squared away. Any other questions before we get started? For the anatomy, there is, yeah. Is it not up yet? Okay. I'm not officially involved in lab, but I'll go in. I think I have access. I'll check what's up with that. Okay. Okay, cool. In that case, we'll get started where we left off. So on Wednesday, we left off with a beautiful, beautiful picture. Okay. And we identified that we've got some cells on here in blue. We saw that in red here, we have our circulatory system with the heart. You can see that we have some cells floating around in it as well. We identified these purple parts as lungs up on top, the GI tract on the right here, and our renal system producing urine down here at the bottom. Okay. So what we didn't talk about, I don't think, is the yellow stuff. Did we talk about the yellow stuff? Okay. Anybody want to talk about the yellow stuff? Anybody have an idea about what's there? Yeah. Right. So what the yellow stuff is, what we're going to be thinking about, so the stuff that's surrounding all of the organs. So yeah, we're thinking about the yellow stuff as the body's internal environment in general. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is how we break down different fluid compartments in the body. So we're going to be thinking about that as like all the liquid that's outside all of your cells in the body, except for the circulatory system, which has its own kind of special fluid in the blood surrounding cells. Okay. So this comes back in your official lecture slides at the end, but since I color coded that picture, I'm just gonna highlight for you how these colors are going to correspond to the material we'll go through in a second. So inside all those blue cells, we have intracellular fluid, right? So each of these colors is basically showing us a type of fluid, which we're going to think of as our divisions of total body water, TBW, all the water in your body. Okay, so inside cells, inside, cellular, inside cells. We have our intracellular fluid. All the rest of the water in our body is outside a cell, right? We have one type of water inside a cell. Outside the cells, we're going to be a bit more specific. So for our extracellular fluid, so extra outside cellular cells, we have two kinds we're going to think about in different ways. Because when we're thinking about physiology, they function differently. So if we're thinking about just in general, out in the body, surrounding organs, surrounding tissue cells, out in your arm or your leg or whatever, that's your interstitial fluid. So inter between, and the stitial part is referring to like tissue. So interstitial fluid is our general and most common type of extracellular fluid. So probably the type that you might have thought about or might have been talking about in your other courses, whether you named it out loud or not. The other type of extracellular fluid we have, you might not have thought about as precisely, bless you, our plasma in the blood technically also counts as extracellular fluid because we have blood cells, right? That's why we have those little blue cells swimming around in the circulatory system. But they're surrounded by a very specialized type of fluid in the blood. So the blood plasma is a type of extracellular fluid found within the circulatory system. So we'll talk about like the percentage of your body that is made up of each of these in a little bit. But when we add them all together, right, we add together the intracellular fluid with those two types of extracellular fluid, the plasma, the interstitial fluid, we're eventually going to get our total body water. Extracellular fluid here and total body water are not highlighted because you'd have to add up together to get them. Extracellular fluid was 14 is because we added 11 and 3, and then we added that to our total intracellular fluid. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Does somebody want to answer for me a final question? We did have purple on that diagram. So why are the lungs, the GI tract, the urinary tract not on this list? Why didn't I highlight something for purple? Like because we're getting rid of stuff? Close. So what we're going to find as we go through a more detailed version of this picture, see how they have openings to the outside? So this is probably why you're thinking discharge. We're just not going to think about them as part of the internal environment for the body at all. Right? We have a layer here separating the air in the lungs from the rest of the tissue in your body. You got your mouth at the top of the GI tract here. You have the anus down at the bottom there, right? And we have a lining of cells that's touching the food, right? So we have these openings to the external environment. So we're not fully controlling that. Technically, we also have an opening here for the renal system and urinary tract. So these are not really communicating with the cells inside our body in the same way. The reason we ultimately care about this is we're going to be focusing a lot on different types of cells in different organ systems and what can cross the cell membrane of, say, a neuron. What happens? Why do we care? What does that have to do with how that organ system functions? So to understand that, these are our first buckets of like, what type of fluid is there? And we can think of each of these types of fluid as having different concentrations of different ions, different molecules, cellular machinery inside the cells. And that's going to matter for how your body functions. So they're all like separated from each other. Okay, so now we're going to start the slides that you have a copy of. So our objectives for today are to think about that distribution of water in the body. So there are going to be a lot of words written out about this, but basically what we just talked through this questioning process, more formally defined. And then we're going to talk about homeostasis and what that means for the body and how we maintain homeostasis through the process of negative feedback. So here's the more complicated version of that picture. This is from your textbook figure 1.4. So while I am an anatomist and therefore kind of horrified at this very square shape for a human body, from the perspective of understanding how tissues and different systems function, this is helpful because it's showing us what parts of the body can and can't communicate with each other and kind of what layers they're going to have to cross in this big picture kind of perspective. So it's a simplified wrong shape. It's missing parts. Lots of different cell types aren't shown, right? We're just thinking about your generalized cell here. But that means that we can focus on our different exchange processes that we generalize happening between these different fundamental types of tissue in the body. Okay. So the first piece that we're making sure that we can tell apart our external environment versus our internal environment. So anything that touches the outside, that touches the air, swimming, touches water, all right, that's going to be communicating without a barrier with the external environment, right? When you breathe in air, you don't get to pick, I'm going to breathe in only oxygen into my lungs, right? You're not going to say, okay, there's a poisonous gas in the air, but I'm going to just like filter it out by sort of closing my lips. That's not going to work, okay? The same thing conceptually can kind of happen with the other organ systems that have openings to the outside of the body. So all of the internal environment for the body is lined by these epithelial cells. So this layer, this line forming the outside, that's our epithelial cell layer. And it's really good at blocking stuff from squeezing between cells so that anything that comes in or out of the body has to go through a cell and therefore is regulated. And most of the time, there are lots of things we're going to be preventing from coming into our body. Okay, so we're controlling all that stuff in yellow and therefore what is in our different organ systems on the inside, but you can't control what's in the air in the room in that same kind of way. Okay. So we have our external environment. Usually my meeting controls let me drop. Okay. Now we can see these. Okay. So we have a barrier between our external environment and our internal environment. So that outer line is our epithelial cell layer, right? So that's the sides of the square, but also the tube going up to our kidney, right? Continuing, we have an epithelial cell layer lining the GI tract. I'll just put some more body over here in this square. And we have an epithelial cell layer protecting us from any pathogens that might be in the lungs. Okay. So we have outside, inside, external, internal. Anything inside that epithelial layer is part of our internal environment. All right. So the internal environment is what's going to be surrounding most of our cells. That's why we had just like our generic kind of cell type over here. We're not getting into the nitty gritty until we get to specific organ systems. So just some general, whatever kind of tissue. Okay. So inside each of these cells, we have our intracellular fluid, our ICF, that we'll get to in a second. And surrounding it, we have some type of extracellular fluid. Around the tissue, so the stuff in yellow before, we have our interstitial fluid, and then around the plasma or the blood cells, we have the plasma. Put that back on. I'll label these all so that you can label yours too. Nice little red donut. Okay, so here we have plasma, which is a type of extracellular fluid. Just generically around, we have interstitial fluid, which we're going to abbreviate ISF. And inside our cells, no matter where they are. So this is going to count for our generic cells as well as our blood cells over here. We have our intracellular fluid. Okay. All right, so we see these different types of fluid separated out in our little diagram. So between these different fluid compartments, we're going to see stuff getting exchanged, right? So sometimes we're going to be moving water across cell membranes. Sometimes we're going to be moving ions. Sometimes we're going to be thinking about glucose when you eat a sugary meal. How do you get that into your cells to do metabolism? So we're interested in this because we're going to be interested in that kind of communication between our cells, which are mostly made up of water. So we have exchange at various places in this diagram. Okay, so we have exchange. Here we can see absorption happening when we go from our quote unquote external environment in the GI tract, right? Where you might have whatever you ate or drank, right? We're going to absorb some things. Each of these is going to have a direction, each of these terms down here. We'll talk a lot about that, especially in A&P2 when we get to the kidneys. Okay, but we absorb things from our external environment into the body, essentially into the plasma here. Right? We also have exchange here between that blood plasma and our cells. Okay? We have things going the other way. We can have secretion into the GI tract or into our urinary system here. We're going to have filtration. So we're going to have a specialized form of removing water from our blood. They're happening with the kidneys. And we can reabsorb things, right? We can filter something out and then say, hey, never mind, I want that back. So we can reabsorb stuff into the body. Don't worry about memorizing the directions for each of these right now. But these are some of the processes that are going to be happening throughout this course and that we're going to be kind of tracking and keeping note of. And we'll define them and revisit them each as necessary and as is relevant to the organ system. But all of them, we have communication happening between different compartments, different fluid compartments in the body, or communication between the external environment and the internal environment. So we might have communication between the blood and the external environment at the lungs, the GI tract, and the kidneys. We'll have different mechanisms of exchange happening across the GI tract, particularly absorbing nutrients from food or secreting different things we might want to get rid of into the GI tract for removal from the body. In the kidneys, we have similar processes happening as well. One of the main roles of the kidneys we'll see many months from now is that it filters out the blood, partially to maintain your blood pressure. So we have filtration happening, and we make readjustments to the concentrations of various things that got filtered out with the water. We have reabsorption. We're going to be secreting some toxic materials into that renal system as well, and eliminating those as urine. We'll get to the details. when we get to each of these. So short little thing to make sure you're paying attention. So if you have a ooh, how did I start it? Let's be able to click on it. I go again. Guess they updated the computers over the summer. That makes sense. Go from here. Okay. Okay. Please go back. Okay. So if you don't have a device with you, just answer for yourself on a piece of paper. But if you do, go ahead and scan this QR code to select as many of these things as you think are part of the body's internal environment. Or okay, take another couple seconds, go through, make sure we're all on the same page. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so let's go back to the picture then. Right. So when we're thinking external versus internal, right, the external environment is anything separated from the inside of your body by this epithelial cell layer, right? So basically anything in purple is still external because you can't totally control it. So actually, all of these three examples, those are part of the external environment, not the internal. The only thing on this list that is part of the internal environment that's actually inside your body in a physiology kind of way is the extracellular fluid. So the extracellular fluid is like surrounding your tissues. So that interstitial fluid is a type of extracellular fluid. It's that internal environment for most cells. And the plasma would be the internal environment from the perspective of, say, a white blood cell in your circulatory system. Okay, so those are parts of the internal environment, the extracellular fluid. Lumen means like the hollow part. So that might have been tripping you up, I'm not sure. So lumen, the hollow part. So the lumen of the gastrointestinal system. All right, so we can see here, that's where we're passing through our nutrients, water, anything we ate or drank before we actually process it. And we have communication with the external environment on both ends. So it's not fully controlled yet. We're still thinking about it kind of part of the external environment. We don't have like a blood cell directly cozying up to your hamburger in your stomach. Same thing with air in the lungs and urine in the renal system. We have that communication with the external environment of your entire body, not blocked by any kind of filter. Okay. So when we're thinking internal environment, we're really thinking just inside the body, just stuff that you can control. We're focusing on that because stuff that's inside your body where you can control what came in, that stuff we're going to be able to change and control through the process of homeostasis. We're not going to be able to use homeostasis to adjust like the temperature of a pool you're in or the concentration of different gases composing the air we breathe, right? So this is kind of dividing what we can control and what we can't control through physiological mechanisms. That's like the point of that. Okay. Right. Again, just various pictures of these body fluids and compartments that we've been hammering home. Okay. So our total body water here is all highlighted in blue. What's in purple? Inside an organ, but still part of the external environment because we haven't processed it yet. We haven't regulated it yet. So all the water in your body highlighted. Then we're going to have specific different types in specific different places. We care about this because these different fluid compartments are separated by membranes and cell layers that we are going to be able to regulate. We're going to be able to control. We're going to be able to send things across through different types of transport processes. So our total body water has water, but it also has some dissolved materials in it. You're going to expect to see some medium-ish size molecules, some larger molecules. A bunch of dissolved materials is really mostly what we're thinking about when we think about what is in the total body water. We're going to be really interested particularly in ions in this course, but also things like glucose. Okay. We're going to have different solutions in the cells. We have different solutions surrounding our cells. You can see it all in that picture. That same text. So our body fluids are subdivisions of this total body water. We care about where they're located because that's going to tell us something about what types of cells they're in communication with, what they're touching. So a body compartment here and the body fluid are going to have the same name when we talk about them. So we'll talk about the intracellular fluid inside cells as a location. We'll talk about its composition, what's dissolved in that fluid, what's in solution there. We'll talk about extracellular fluid, everything that's outside a cell that may be different in terms of its composition from what's inside the cell. All right, so here is the first example of the red text. Sorry if I clicked past one without pointing it out to you. So this would be like one of the words that's blank on your version of the slide. Okay. So this is telling us our intracellular fluid, our ICF, is a compartment with the fluid inside the cells. So basically we're thinking mainly things like cytoplasm when we're thinking about the intracellular fluid. Our extracellular fluid, as we mentioned, has two different types. So the extracellular fluid is outside the cells, but it's still in the body. So extracellular fluid is really what we're going to think of as the internal environment for the body. We're going to divide that extracellular fluid. We're going to be specific. Is it in our circulatory system? Then it's plasma and it's just touching blood cells mainly. Is it just generally somewhere in our body, not part of the blood? That's our interstitial fluid, our ISF, surrounding all the other types of cells. So here's that chart that I pulled up before we broke into the slides that you have a copy of. So here we're seeing the breakdown of our different types of body fluid, our different places where we expect to see water and some things in solution in the body. So in total, the average textbook person, which the average textbook person tends to be a 70-kilogram male. We've got about 60% of body weight made up of water. So if we're doing math, that's going to come to about 42 liters of water in this average human body. Okay. So if we want to break down those 42 liters into their specific location, we've got about 40% of body weight that is in a cell when we're talking about that. Okay. So about 28 of those 42 liters is inside one of your cells. That may or may not be surprising to you, but that means you've got a fair amount of like loose water, right? Not constrained inside a cell, but surrounding cells, right? So ICF, intracellular fluid, we've got these 28 liters inside cells, but our extracellular fluid, that remaining 14, is either a little bit of it in your plasma, right? So in your blood, and that one may be more obvious, right? So when you bleed, there's a lot of liquid, you can see it. So 3 of those 14 liters are in the plasma. And the rest of it, the other 11 of those 14 liters, are surrounding cells in other parts of your body. So think like your foot. You're going to have some interstitial fluid surrounding the cells, kind of bathing them from the outside, this interstitial fluid. So here we have those calculations, how we got those liters, are giving you the percentages of body weight, so you can extrapolate to people who are not the average textbook person, which most people are not the average textbook person. Okay, so about 20% of your body weight is extracellular fluid, and of that, 80% of it is interstitial fluid, and about 20% of it is specifically plasma. Questions about these breakdowns? So in the future, let's be prepared, right? We're going to be thinking about, okay, tracking what's in our intracellular fluid, what's in the extracellular fluid. When we have something getting into a cell, leaving a cell, we're going to be thinking in this first unit, actually, about what are the forces on the different chemicals dissolved in solution inside the cell, outside the cell, and what does that mean for where they're going to want to move? And are we going to let them move to those locations? And what kind of impact does that have on how your body functions? Okay. So these are just pulled from your textbook. So these appear periodically. I leave them in your slides, but you can also see them when you're reading the textbook. They're just checking kind of discussion questions, things that you should be able to understand once you've studied the material and kind of extrapolate it a little to thoroughly study the stuff and make sure you really, really get it all. So we're not going to go through those right now, but they're a great study tool. You want to make sure that they make sense to you. And if they don't, that's a great place to start asking some more questions as kind of like a gut check of, do I really get it? Okay. The next topic that we're breaking into is homeostasis, right? So it's kind of crazy that you're in Arizona and it's 120 degrees outside, right? Your body inside, you're not having heat stroke, it's going to be the same temperature as our bodies up here in the middle of winter if it's negative 32 degrees outside are, right? So your body manages to maintain a number of things pretty constant day to day. Not always perfectly constant. There's a little bit of variation. It's a kind of dynamic thing happening here. But if you're one of those generic little blue cells hanging out as our example of tissue, we can expect the environment that that cell is in to be pretty predictable, right? You're going to be able to predict what temperature is that cell going to experience on a daily basis. What is the pH of the plasma surrounding the blood cells? How much blood is there? How much pressure are we dealing with pushing on our different types of tissue? Yeah. So that's what we are thinking about when we think about homeostasis and homeostatic mechanisms for maintaining homeostasis. Okay. So formally, homeostasis is the ability to maintain this relatively constant internal environment. Not absolutely everything is regulated. We have some really important things that your body is always constantly checking and always trying to adjust if it gets out of whack, okay? So particularly, we're going to be regulating temperature, body temperature. This is why you can test if you have a fever and it tells you something's going wrong, because usually this is kept in check through homeostatic mechanism, and we're maintaining a constant temperature. Volume, usually we mean volume of blood here. You have low blood pressure or high blood pressure. Those both create problems for the body. High blood pressure creates like a kind of constant day-to-day stress on the function of your organs. Low blood pressure, you might have noticed if you have really low blood pressure one day, you stand up, you're going to get dizzy, maybe you see stars, your vision goes gray, right? Also a problem for like brain function there, right? At least in that moment of standing up. Okay. And we're also going to be regulating the composition of the internal environment, by which we really mean what's in those different body fluids. We're regulating the composition of those fluids in terms of, in particular, different ions, but also nutrients, waste products, all kinds of chemicals we might be interested in. So composition. This is a complex process if you think about the exact mechanism, because we're going to require multiple organ systems to be communicating with each other, right? Your nerves, your brain can notice a problem with your temperature, but you're going to need other parts of your body to help you actually adjust the temperature. So we're going to have a bunch of systems in place for sensing changes to any of these things, for sending signals to different organ systems in the body that might be able to help, and then for actually affecting those changes. Okay. The main purpose of a lot of the physiological mechanisms that we're going to be talking about in A&P is to maintain homeostasis. Maintaining homeostasis keeps you healthy. If homeostasis gets out of control and you can't control it, getting out of our desired range, you're going to see implications for people's health, for their body function. So we're going to have disruption of homeostasis as the basis for a lot of diseases, and potentially even death, depending which of them you're messing with and exactly how far off it gets. So homeostasis is really important. We're going to accomplish this through negative feedback loops. Okay. We'll see if this QR code thing works this time when I click through, but take a second to think for yourself, and maybe talk to a neighbor about what you think negative feedback is going to mean when we talk about this. So negative feedback and understanding negative feedback is going to be really important for this class. So I want you to predict what I'm going to talk about as I talk about that next. What do those words bring to mind? Or if you've done the reading, what did you read? I'm going to click through and see if this method of putting in an answer works. Really? Okay. I'll play around with this room in a second while you're not here. Make sure those are working in the future. Okay. We're about to talk about negative feedback loops. Does anybody want to volunteer an idea about what we mean when we talk about negative feedback? Yeah.
Something your body rises, for example,
Perfect. Yes. What was your name? Mackenzie. Okay. Yeah. So people sometimes get confused about negative feedback after I talk about it. So what you are thinking ahead of time is exactly right. So when we're thinking about homeostasis and negative feedback, what we're thinking about is the fact that the body, when we have something that's regulated through homeostasis, when it notices a change in one direction, it's going to move it back in the opposite direction, bounce back right to that regulated variable. So we're going to be seeing changes and then opposite changes back to our original desired state. I think people tend to get trip up when they think of negative as always minus. So if you look at numbers, so I want to make sure that you're thinking of negative as a change in the opposite direction as opposed to just down. And we're going to run through examples, but that one on temperature is perfect, right? So you have mechanisms where with temperature, you get to hot, change in one direction. Negative feedback, we're going to have a signal that we notice that change going up. We pull temperature back down to normal body temperature. We can also have the opposite, but still going to be a negative feedback loop. You get super cold, right? You don't want to get hypothermia, right? You're getting really, really cold. You might start shivering, right? These are homeostatic mechanisms, forms of negative feedback, returning you back up to normal body temperature. So negative feedback, really all about these loops, these mechanisms of returning us to our original state. So when we're thinking about this, we're really just thinking about a change from a flat kind of baseline. We start to see a change in one direction. Then if we have negative feedback going on, we're going to see that level coming back up to normal towards what we're going to call a set point. Okay. I'm going to click through to a figure that I think is from your book. Yeah. Okay. So they like using an example of a car before they actually get to the actual physiology. So here we're looking at kind of like cruise control as you're going up a hill. Right. So we're thinking about the speed of the car. So how fast you're going versus time. So this is just over time on the x-axis, right? So if you're cruising along flat, going at 60 miles an hour, we're keeping that under condition. Just gonna not have to do much. We're not adding any gas. We're not putting on any brakes. As you start to go up a hill, you have your cruise control on. You shouldn't see this change so much on your speedometer, but as gravity pulls you backwards, right, there's a force now trying to pull you back down the hill, right? So this might lower your speed if you didn't do anything about it, right? So we're thinking about this going down, the speed going down a little bit as we start to be pulled backwards down the hill, and that same amount of gas isn't moving us as fast as we were going. So here's the point at which your body would notice an error signal, and you might notice an error signal if you're driving as you see that speed changing, right? Okay. So the error signal is just that difference between your set point, right? So what you want to be at versus where you are at any given moment in time, right? So the error signal is just the difference between these 2 points. That error signal is your signal to start making changes. So in a car, you'd step on the gas and your speed would start to come back to normal. In your body, this negative feedback loop is going to do the same thing for things like temperature, pH, volume, composition of fluids. Okay. So when we think about this in terms of some specific things we want to define, if we're thinking about homeostasis, we want to make sure that we're thinking about a regulated variable. So something that we actually do control, that we do care about. So our regulated variable would be like body temperature is a regulated variable. Another thing that we might regulate is like glucose levels in your blood. Your body actually regulates that. Examples in daily life might be like the speed of a car. We have other things that we regulate in bodies. Yeah. Sodium levels are going to be really important for how your nervous system and your heart functions. Blood pH are important for the function of lots of proteins in your body, and all sorts of mechanisms rely on proteins. We have a number of specific things that your body regulates. So those are our regulated variables. And your regulated variable is what you're putting here on the y-axis, right? So the regulated variable is the thing you are measuring. The set point is the value that you want for that, right? So core body temperature, Celsius, 37 degrees Celsius. right? 98.6 when we're measuring in Fahrenheit, right? So that would be our set point for temperature. That's our expected value, our desired value. So we'll have different set points that we'll learn in our different body systems for different regulated variables. Blood sugar happens to be 100 milligrams per deciliter. pH of your body should be about 7.4. The negative feedback is when we have these opposite changes when we've deviated away from a set point, right? So if we change something that's regulated that we don't want to change, we want to keep it constant, right? So if a regulated variable decreases or increases, the system is going to make the opposite change. So this is basically self-correction, right? Homeostasis is your body self-correcting that level of your regulated variable, pulling you back to the set point. Okay. So negative feedback describes this whole process. The error signal is that difference between the set point, that normal level, and whatever you happen to be at, and we pull ourselves back to normal. We have different parts of your body that are interacting here in order to actually make these changes, okay? So for structures that enable us to maintain homeostasis, we are going to need receptors to receive the information, right? So we have to notice an error signal. We have to notice deviation from a set point. So that's going to be the job of a receptor. It receives that information, maybe a sensor. We're going to have integrating sensors like in our brain that are collecting information from multiple places, right? We want to maintain core body temperature, but maybe it's okay if your pinky toe is cold, right? So we want to know what temperature is in specific places, in multiple places. We're going to have to put together different parts of information. And we're going to have to send out a signal to effector organs that can actually make changes. And we're going to have signaling processes between all of these, like that communication has pathways. So in this example, we have how we might regulate blood pressure. Okay? So when you're lying down, gravity is pulling all your blood basically to your back, right? So you have approximately equivalent amounts here getting pulled on your legs, your torso, and your head. When you stand up too fast, right? Initially, gravity is pulling all your blood down. So if you didn't have a mechanism to adjust, your blood might like pool in your legs. So a stimulus here would be blood pressure falling. We'd have a sensor and blood pressure receptors that notice this change and tell your brain. So then we're going to have a signal to the brain. And for our blood pressure, it happens to be in your medulla oblongata, sensing that and basically planning a response. Then there are nerves that go out to your body. One of the main effector organs for maintaining your blood pressure is your heart. So it might pump faster, might pump harder to get your blood pressure back up. And ideally, this happens so fast that you never even notice, right? So that's our goal. So here's just a cheat sheet kind of summary of these terms that we're thinking about. So our receptors are detecting stimuli. So thermoreceptors sense temperature, chemoreceptors sense chemicals, baroreceptors sense pressure. Integrating sensors are for orchestrating a response and putting information together. So mostly we're thinking about the brain when we think about an integrating sensor. Signals are allowing different parts of your body to communicate with each other. So really we're thinking like nerves are chemicals. So our endocrine system, our nervous system are going to be really important here. So we're going to be getting input either from that receptor, if we're sending a signal up to an integrating center, or from the integrating center, if the signal is sending our plan out to an effector organ. We're moving stuff through the body, either through chemicals in the blood or through impulses in neurons. And then our effectors actually make a response. So your muscles can contract. Muscle contraction can produce heat. It can also have effects on blood. Glands can produce various enzymes. So these are some of the effector organs that can help us do changes. So we'll stop there. That should get you what you need for that first little 3-question quiz. When we come back, we'll wrap up with negative feedback loops and start in on our next topic. Actually, start in on our prereq quiz.